This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources. Consistent with its Running Right process, Alpha is an energy company committed to being a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward. We fuel progress around the world. More information at alphanr.com.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back to Craig Carper. I think, Craig, the last time you were on, you were a reporter for WCVE PBS, and since this past July, now the news director for radio and WCVE. So appreciate your being on. We're going to have up on the screen the website where people can get the news from you, even if they're not here in Central Virginia. They'll be able to get it streaming and get that information. But appreciate getting a chance to talk with you here in November about the elections. Let's start with the elections.
Sure.
Any comments and reflections on how those turned out?
Absolutely. Well, first off, we appreciated your assistance. You were able to join us in the studio and
glad to
provide
have Bob Gibson there.
And Bob Gibson as well. That was from the Sorensen Institute, for those who may not know. But I thought it was good to have you both in there and discuss the numbers as they were coming in. So it was a little more, I don't know how you'd feel about it. I think there was a little more, I don't know if suspense is the right word, but it was it went on a little longer than we thought it was going to, especially us being, in Richmond. I think we were preoccupied, as much of the state was, with the Gecker-Sturtevant race.
Right.
And it was an interesting back and forth as the numbers were coming in from different precincts and localities. And really that was one of the seats to watch, one of the main seats to watch. And the real takeaway, I think, from the election was that there was a lot of money spent and really essentially no change in the overall control in either chamber. The House of Delegates had a very secure Republican supermajority. The Senate remains very closely divided, but with a slim Republican majority. The Democrats spent a lot of money hoping that they could take control of the chamber. Governor Terry McAuliffe also spent a fair amount of money as well, in addition to third-party groups who had a vested interest in the outcome. But the question now is, well, what now? What does this mean for the governor's legislative agenda and really the kind of laws we'll see written in the next couple of years? So I think it's sort of status quo, I think, is what people are expecting, and not a lot of huge changes. It's we've got two chambers and then the governor, so you've got to get them all to agree on something for it to become law, or at least agree as much as possible.
Right. I haven't gone back and checked it, but I've seen several people, and maybe you've heard the information, it has been a long time since every incumbent won
in
the House and Senate.
Every 122, I think?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
122
No
incumbents.
incumbents lost.
Yeah. So really, I think you'll talk to people. There's a large redistricting movement going on right now. There's multiple lawsuits, sort of attacking the most recent redistricting plan from different angles. The one from a group, the nonpartisan independent redistricting group, One Virginia 2021, theirs focuses more on the issue of compact and contiguous
right.
districts. The other, which were essentially brought by interests within the Democratic Party, were attacking districts, saying they were racially gerrymandered. Federal court ruled twice that they were, that the third congressional district was, but the Supreme Court may have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know
Yeah.
the last time we had a conversation
Right.
that we thought that was maybe somewhat settled, but now the Supreme Court's agreed to hear it.
Right. So maybe months before we have any kind of resolution there.
Right. You know, we were following, we were with you at the station, enjoyed being there, some of the local races, and while we won't take time to talk about them now, I think some of the untold stories around the Commonwealth is that while status quo took place at the General Assembly, that there were changes in local governments with supervisors in some instances, school boards
Right.
and others, and which, if that proves to be true in a significant number of the localities, that's kind of interesting that at the grassroots level,
Right.
there was change. When you get up to the General Assembly level, status quo. So
Right.
maybe it goes back to what you said about the way the districts are drawn.
It's interesting, yeah, and I think everyone tries to draw lessons from these and what it means for, not just the state legislative session, but also what it could mean for upcoming elections. We're in Virginia, we have an election every year.
Yes.
So the next one, the closest in range, is the 2016 presidential election, and people are trying to see what lessons they can glean from the 2015 races, particularly on gun control. There was a lot of money spent by third-party groups talking about raising the issue of gun control, and Mr. Sturdivant ultimately won in the 10th district race. A lot of people are saying, questioning whether that would have been the
Right.
case without this major investment. I'm not sure that it would have made as much of a difference, but there's no way to.
That's right.
There's no way to know. So.
Yes, in some years there have been people who have done some exit polling and then tried to make some conclusions from that, but I don't think that happened in any of these districts where
Harder
there was
to
a lot of quote outside money
Yeah.
in to be able to determine, did that make a difference in your voting for or against a certain candidate.
Right, and it's hard. I think you'll see a lot of that on the presidential level. I think one
Yes.
of the biggest shocks in 2004 was how much it was marriage. That was one of the issues that people were exit
Right.
polled there. You'll see much more exit polling on federal elections than you will on, for a state legislative district
Right.
seat. So, but I think it's maybe it falls on the press to do these things.
Do some of the research.
Yeah.
Well, we'll move over some before our time's out.
Sure.
Talk about some of the policy and issues for 2016. Bills are starting to be introduced here, even as we're talking middle of November, and there'll be more bills coming in every day. But what about the big issues that you see?
Well, we were just talking before we started about there was a release from the House Republican Caucus. Their number one priority, House Bill 1. I believe you're going to have
Yes,
Delegate
Lemunyan.
Lemunyan. I'm not sure if this segment's airing before or after, but I believe his House Bill 1 will focus on tolling I-66. That's a big priority issue for the Republicans. We're in Richmond, and not as much of an
Right.
issue for us here, but certainly an issue for people in Northern Virginia, whether we should be imposing new tolls on roads and what the connection is for maintenance or construction.
So what about health care?
Healthcare. I would say essentially we're probably not going to see very many big changes this year. The governor's main priority when he ran in 2013 was for Medicaid expansion in compliance with the Affordable Care Act. The Republicans, this is an issue that polls very well for both sides with different positions. The Republicans get a big boost from saying they will oppose Medicaid expansion. Democrats, it's one of their #1 priorities. Since the Republicans essentially hold all the cards in the General Assembly, I'd say it's unlikely to happen, though the governor has been able to achieve some small victories from his perspective toward that ultimate goal, doing things that he can through executive action and administrative action. I think that there are people expecting that he will try to continue that this year.
Thinking about public safety and any thoughts you'd have on that, because before you arrived here at the Capitol in 2009, prior to 9/11, there was very little security. Everything was open here at the Capitol. Then it tightened up.
Right.
In light of ongoing concerns and recently the tragedies in Paris, gun control you'd already mentioned, do you get any sense that public safety issues may surface?
I think there's always a general amount of focus on public safety. I think one of the things the governor did, it's been almost a month now, was he banned firearms in state buildings. That applies to, let's say 99.9 something % of state buildings, excluding the one we are sitting in right now, the General Assembly building, and the state capitol, because those are under the control of the legislature. So I believe people, every Martin Luther King Day, there's a lot of advocacy groups for a bunch of different issues, but there's always a big pro-gun control rally and a gun rights rally as well. You see a lot of people coming and open carrying in the Capitol and the General Assembly building, and I don't think that's likely to change this year. Though I'd be interested to see the other bills that people submit on public safety, whether there's an emphasis on, school resource officers was something we talked a lot
Yes.
about. That could be something as people are feeling less safe in the wake of this horrible tragedy in Paris, there may be a renewed push to have more law enforcement and more public safety officers out there.
And those decisions about guns or no guns in this building, General Assembly building, the Capitol, are really purview of the Joint Rules Committee. But as we're talking, I guess there's nothing to prevent a member of the legislature from introducing a bill.
Right.
Now, where it will go and how far it will go, I have no crystal ball on that, but someone could introduce.
Sure. And I would think that would go to and I'm trying to remember the subcommittee's name, but there's a committee where I think that would be swiftly killed in the House. It's a subgroup of the House Militia and Public Safety Committee where a lot of these bills typically die a quick death. So.
Okay, last minute. Any other issue that you?
Well, the governor said his centerpiece of his budget, his legacy budget, will be education.
Yes.
So seeing where those dollars go, I think that I think there are opportunities for the governor to really get something done here on public education. I think the key to getting Republican support will be making sure those dollars go into the classroom.
Yeah. Craig Carper, thank you very much, and our viewers, stay tuned. A brief intermission, and we're expecting to see Delegate James LeMunyan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, welcome, Delegate LeMunyan. We were just having some good conversation, but now we appreciate your being on This Week in Richmond, representing portions of Fairfax and Loudoun County. Elected in 2009, re-elected every year since, and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about some issues. I'll tell our viewers that we're having this conversation in the middle of November. By the time they see the program, it'll be toward the end of the month. But today, the notice came out that House Bill 1 has been filed, and it's your bill. So why don't we start with your telling the viewers around the Commonwealth why you introduced this bill and what it would seek to accomplish.
Sure. Well, happy to do that and happy to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Delighted.
Transportation is the big issue in Northern Virginia. And one of the things that VDOT did for us a little over a year ago is finally give us a number on how bad the problem is. And what they reported is that people in Northern Virginia waste 900,000 hours a day, every business day, in traffic.
900,000?
Yeah, and that includes Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, Arlington, Alexandria. And if you put that in different terms, for someone who lives to be 103 years old, they live about 900,000 hours. So that's sort of the wasted just time, not making it to the scouting events, home for dinner, lost income, a whole lot of things. So it's a real problem that we've got to address. And Interstate 66 is arguably the worst problem in Northern Virginia. And so we need to put more capacity on that road. The proposal that the governor's had to toll the portion of the road inside the Beltway without adding lane capacity really doesn't solve the congestion problem. So it's not just the $17 toll that they reported. That was their number, not one that we developed. It's not that that would just be unaffordable to people who would want to use the road during the rush hour and have only one person in the car. It's that the problem is much bigger than that, and that just isn't the fix. So what the bill intends to do is basically hit the reset button on this issue and see if we can come up with a solution that really will make a significant impact in reducing our congestion problem in Northern Virginia.
Your career is interesting, and your constituents know about it, but to tell viewers around the Commonwealth, you served some time at the federal level.
Sure.
And in commerce. You're an entrepreneur, and even legislators aren't all lawyers. In fact, the smaller number, almost each election's lawyers, but you have a very interesting educational background too that really equips you to look at some significant issues.
Well, people of the 67th District have been very good to me to elect me and re-elect me. And I work with a lot of lawyers. I have over the course of time, but I am not an attorney. But what I try to bring to the conversation on a range of issues is what you might call objective analysis, and really look at issues from a number standpoint, both on what we may have accomplished, and this 900,000 figure is actually one that I was nudging VDOT to go analyze and report. But also to look at what the impact of legislation and public policy can be going forward based on hard data, not just what's going to feel good, but what's actually going to do good. And I try to bring that to the table, whether it's transportation, education, public safety, or whatever the issue might be.
So pick up on education and tell us some about what you're seeing in the upcoming 2016 session, either what you'll be working on or what your colleagues will.
Well, the big issue on education for this coming session is going to be the budget. And we're all interested in seeing what the governor is going to propose in another month or so. I've actually spoken to him personally about that, and I've told him what I think he already knew, is that we need to put more money into K-12 education and allow that money to be allocated through our local composite index, which is not a perfect formula by any stretch. Rather than try to earmark additional education money for one thing or another, or attach a lot of strings from Richmond. In most cases we have elected school boards around Virginia, some appointed school boards, but these are the people who have the authority to do what's right for their schools at a particular time. Some location might need more on teacher pay, one might need to do more on construction. Others, like in Northern Virginia, have challenges related to a significant number of students who have English as a second language. And so we really need to give the localities the autonomy to do that. Now, the challenge in the budget, and people don't like to talk about this, but since I'm a numbers person, I just sort of lay it out. The reason why it's a challenge to fund education is that the Medicaid portion of the budget is growing so fast. Medicaid, the growth of the current Medicaid program, and I'm not talking about Medicaid expansion, the growth of the current Medicaid program, in my mind, is the biggest threat to K-12 education in Virginia, because it's eating up most of the additional dollars we get from the little bit of economic growth that we have in Virginia, and that's why we're not funding education enough. And we've got to come to terms with that as a General Assembly, and I've said that many times in town hall meetings in Northern Virginia. Unfortunately, it's not reported by the news for whatever reason, but that's how the heads are being butted in the budget. It's Medicaid and it's education. We've got to sort that out.
Well, as a numbers person and one who applies that criteria, if you could wave the magic wand, or not the magic wand, but get legislation, how could the Commonwealth get a better handle on those Medicaid expenses?
Biggest thing we could do is convince people in Washington to give us more autonomy on how to spend the federal portion of that. It's a 50-50 cost share between the federal and the state government. Give us more autonomy on how to spend not only the federal money, but the local money, or the state money, so that we can make sure that people in need get what they need, and we're not necessarily spending it in a way that's being mandated by the federal government that A, is either wasteful, or B, doesn't help the folks who really need it the most. And it's my big beef, not just on this issue, but generally with the federal government. They treat the states as if we're some kind of colony of Washington, D.C., and they have all these mandates. They're all well-intended, I'll acknowledge that, but the implementation becomes very clumsy and ineffective. On the education side, just to give you another example, yes. We found in some work that the Education Committee did a few years ago, that more than that 99 reports were required every year from local school divisions to Richmond to prove that we were educating children and doing all the other things that happen in school. Well, we got that reduced to 39 with some good work of the State Board and the legislature. They came back to a hearing, I guess in 2012, 2013, and said, well, we've got to 39, and I asked, okay, well, what's the plan to keep going? 39 still sounds big. They said, well, 35 of those are required by the federal government. So on domestic issues, the federal government really needs to take a posture of sort of handing back these responsibilities, not dropping them, not axing them, but in a thoughtful way, handing back these responsibilities to state and local governments. And you know, Virginia will do it a little different than Missouri, and Missouri a little different than Montana, and I think folks in Washington just have to say, you know, that's okay. Because they've got other things to think about, like terrorism and international trade and the macroeconomy and the value of the dollar, and those things. They ought to focus on that and do a better job on those things.
Okay, thank you. You also mentioned public safety, I think, as you were a litany of some matters. Are there legislation that you see coming forward in that arena?
Well, I view it, again, in the Northern Virginia context as a transportation issue. One of the concerns that we have on I-66 is it's 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction in and out of Washington. We have the 2 Beltway bridges. We have 395 into Washington. You know, we don't have enough capacity to evacuate people from Washington in the event of a Homeland Security emergency and get first responders where they need to be because of a transportation system that's just way out of date. And the tragedy in Paris on Friday should point out again, as if we didn't know, we should have known all along, that capital cities in the Western world are targets. And we know that from September 11, 2001, and it's still true. And that's why we need a transportation system that not only reduces the amount of time people spend in congestion on an ordinary day, but make sure we've got a transportation network that protects the capital city of the United States in the event of an emergency. And we're just not where we need to be.
Okay, hot issues, important issues, and I'm sure there are others. Before our time's up, what else do you see coming around in 2016?
Well, it's one of the issues that I'm interested in. It's a little different than many. Is related to the state-initiated effort to amend the Constitution of the United States. And I think Delegate Lingenfelter's introduced legislation on this in the past, as have I and others. And when we look at Washington and just this mindless accumulation of debt, some of these regulatory overreach issues I've mentioned, what comes to mind is a little-known provision in the U.S. Constitution that says that states can initiate amendments as well as Congress. And a number of us around the country think it's time we step up and really consider that in a serious way. In any event, some people get a little nervous about that. Hasn't happened before that way. But in any event, 3/4 of the states, meaning 76 separate votes in houses and senates around the state, around the country, would have to approve anything before it would take effect. So it's a very high threshold. And it's only the kind of things that there's a substantial majority of public opinion behind and a real need that we get approved. But I'm for doing that to address the federal debt, because at some point they're going to come back and say, you know, we're not even going to match the Medicaid money we're giving you now. And then, of course, the states are really in a world of hurt. And we've just got to prevent that kind of thing from happening.
Delegate Lemonnier, we very much appreciate your being on This Week in Richmond. Welcome back after another election and no opposition. So we appreciate your service and look forward to your being back in 2016.
All right, thank you very much. Good to be
sir.
with you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com.
Alpha Natural Resources, a leader in mine safety and an environmental steward.
The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.